Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us at this second day in ThinkTent, the first full day in ThinkTent. My name's Mark Littlewood. I'm the director of PopCon, the Popular Conservatives, who are one of the co-hosts of ThinkTent this year. And welcome to this first In Conversation. So let me just tell you how this will work. I'm going to have a conversation with our esteemed guest for about half an hour or so, and then I'll be coming to questions from the floor. So bear in mind what you might want to ask our guest. You're in for a treat over the next hour. Our guest is a former diplomat and civil servant who served as the chief negotiator for exiting the European Union and Task Force Europe between 2019 and 2021. As a Cabinet Office Minister in 2021 before resigning over then Prime Minister Boris Johnson's coercive COVID policies, as well as government net zero commitments and tax hikes. Since joining the House of Lords, he has been a powerful voice for a more robust approach to Conservative policy and recently wrote as a warning that the Conservative Party could disintegrate if we get this leadership race wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a very, very warm welcome to Lord David Frost. Well, David, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got a full hour. I'm going to start with one question. What went wrong? And we'll see if we've got any time left at the end of the hour to move on to my second or third question. What went wrong? Why did we end up, probably to the surprise of few of us, actually, when it actually came to it, in the terrible position we found ourselves in at 1 minute past 10 on the 4th of July? Explain to us your analysis of the build-up to the most catastrophic defeat for the Conservative Party in democratic history, essentially.
Yeah. Well, as you say, lots and lots of things went wrong, but I think one fundamental thing went wrong, which is that we didn't deliver what we said we were going to deliver. We drifted away from what I regard as mainstream, normal Conservative policies. We alienated a lot of our supporters. And when it came to it, people wouldn't come out and vote for us. And, you know, there are many sort of sub-reasons to that, but that's the basic one. We weren't conservative enough. We didn't deliver what we said we were going to deliver. And people had had enough of us by the end.
Which do you think were the most sort of egregious failings? I mean, obviously, lots of commentators and Conservatives are pointing out that we've had I don't know how many consecutive manifestos pledging we're going to get immigration down to net tens of thousands. The best piece of Tory spin I've heard all conference was, I won't say who it was, but said to me, no, we've actually fulfilled that manifesto pledge. It's just it's 75 tens of thousands. Was it that? Was it that the tax burden is the highest since the Second World War, near as damn it? Was it that COVID lockdown was too coercive? Is it an obsession with carbon net zero? Or do these things all sort of mix together and become a bigger problem? Is the sum greater than the parts of these various problems? Which are the two or three that you would sort of say that, you know, the real gut punch for why we failed was X and Y? Or is it a stream of 28 things?
I think it's it's a lot of things, but all stemming from one sort of central problem, I would say, which is that we failed to put up any resistance to the generally collectivist mindset, the zeitgeist that surround at the moment for all sorts of reasons. And, you know, a lot of the things you mentioned, net zero, high taxes, high spending, you know, failure to reform many things, they're all a product of it. I think also we failed to deliver on what we hoped from Brexit, and immigration is simply the most obvious consequence of that, the one's kind of easiest to understand, the most obvious where the consequences are clear every day. But generally, I'm afraid, the last government by the end seemed to regard Brexit as some sort of natural disaster that was best not spoken of. Well, unfortunately for them, the Conservative Party is the Brexit party. Yep. We campaigned on it, we delivered it. And if we, as we did, allow people to think somehow Brexit is failing, then we were going to pay the price for that, and that's exactly what happened.
Now, generally what do you put this down to? And again, there are a large number of different actors and a huge number of different political events going on. So there's more than enough blame to go around, I guess you could say. But PopCon's broad analysis is that, if you like, the institutional infrastructure of the United Kingdom is geared against us. This doesn't mean that achieving Conservative ends is impossible. It just means it goes against the grain, that the quangos that have grown up, we probably now have, it's difficult to measure, but a more potentially politically biased civil service, for example. And if you were to see, I know the Conservatives were divided on the point, but if you were to see sort of Brexit as a goal, that sort of, it shows you how hard it was to get something like that done. Do you think it's that the sort of post-Blairite consensus is geared against us and this makes things very hard? Or is it more that there was just an absence of political will and leadership, that the powers that be in the Conservative Party just weren't actually committed to it? Or were they reasonably committed to it, but just found the going too tough to move things in this direction?
Well, I think there is a bit of institutional opposition, obviously, that's clear. Not just in the civil service, but beyond it, the judiciary, the legal profession, all those kind of things. But I think determined ministers and leadership could push back against that. B, you have to ask the question of how did it get like that? Why did we allow this to happen? And I come back to this sense that we have allowed ourselves to be captured by a sort of mental collectivist mindset in which it's natural to look to the government to do things. We've lost our trust in the kind of Hayekian ability of people to organise themselves and make goals and achieve things without the government being involved. Too much of the party's been captured by this sort of heresy, and we almost don't realise it. I was, just to illustrate the point, I was in a National Trust bookshop the other day, and to my surprise, I found this collection of Margaret Thatcher's speeches published in the mid-70s by the CPS.
I'm amazed that hasn't been cancelled by the National Trust.
Exactly. Published by the CPS, but nothing is perfect. And she says in it, in one of her speeches, this is from the mid-70s, we have allowed our thinking to be dominated by socialism to a point where we even define our own position in terms of how, where and why we differ from socialism and socialists, as if conservatism were primarily an alternative to socialism. Now, and I think that's how we've got about collectivism. We have lost confidence in conservative free markets, freedom, getting on with your own life, doing your own thing as being the normal thing. We think we have to explain it the whole time and justify why government doesn't need to be involved. And that has got into every bit of our national life and a lot of the way our party runs. And we've got to try and dismantle some of this if we're going to have a clear sense of our own convictions again.
I mean, a frustration for me, I'm sure I've put it to you before, David, I've certainly put it to a good number of members in this audience, looking over the entire period in office of 14 years, I got more and more jaded by hearing leading politicians, be it one of the 5 prime ministers or the Chancellor of the Exchequer, begin a speech which I'd be reading the transcript of, which would usually start by saying, we need to make the case again for free market capitalism and to make the case again for it and to really get across the benefits of free market capitalism. And I'd be rubbing my hands with glee, thinking this is just what I need. That paragraph would then just end with no case for free market capitalism having been put. And the speech would just segue into a whole list of statist interventions that the government was now going to spend money on or regulate out of existence. Do you think that the problem was Conservatives, by and large, you're a noble exception, haven't actually put the free market case? We either took it for granted or considered it was too dangerous to enunciate such a case. So the Overton window, the spread of what's politically possible, has shifted enormously to the left after 14 years of Conservative government.
Yeah, we lost confidence, definitely, in expressing our own ideas. And we came to believe somehow or other that economic growth kind of just happened, and politics was about sharing the proceeds of growth rather than something you had to keep maintaining and working at. And I do think a lot of the party has lost confidence in the ability of free market capitalism, letting people get on with their own thing in their own way to deliver results. I do think quite a bit of the party has been captured by what I regard as a heresy, really, for Conservatives, which is the belief that state action is good as long as Conservatives are in charge of it. And that ignores the fact that there are simply problems with having so much of economic, political life done by the state. You get into all sorts of political economy problems. Conservatives don't know any better than socialists how to run the economy. Only the free market delivers growth, and we've got to get back to it. We've got to start unwinding it. And you hear so many calls for industrial policy, for investment in whatever net zero is the fashion, bringing back industry to the country. I mean, I'm not against any of those things if they are justified by the market and they can pay their way. If they can't, we shouldn't be involved in it. That's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, the frustration I think that I've had over the last 2 or 3 decades with politicians of all stripes is, and I think this applies to Conservatives in particular, but it wasn't a Conservative politician I had this argument with, it was a Liberal Democrat politician when the Liberal Democrats were in coalition. And I pointed out to this chap, who was a cabinet minister, that I'd understood that Liberal Democrat policy was that we needed substantial road building across the United Kingdom. Yet here were examples of 50 or 60 Liberal Democrat leaflets all opposing the particular local road that was going to be built. And he explained to me, yes, no, Mark, you don't understand. We are in favour of road building in general, but we are against every specific road building scheme. And it seems to me that the Conservatives too often have been, especially in terms of state expenditure, in favour of reducing government spending in general. But you actually say, well, which particular programme are you going to exorcise, or which particular area of government expenditure are you going to cut? Answer comes to none, right? No. We've not been serious about government expenditure getting under control at all.
No,
right?
Absolutely.
And are you worried, therefore, I can see from your landlord and your badge, which candidate you're supporting, and we'll get onto that in a moment, that when Kemi Badenoch suggests yesterday that perhaps maternity pay is, perhaps a bit too high, there are shrieks of how very dare you even suggest this? How on earth are we going to have a serious discussion in this party and then to the country about getting government expenditure down if that's the reaction to an almost off-the-cuff remark about maternity pay?
Well, it's got to be part of a bigger strategy. One of the biggest tasks we've got to do in the next couple of years is something like the Stepping Stones programme that was done under Thatcher in the late 70s in opposition, which is to build a new strategy, a clear set of policies, and sell and explain them. And that's got to be connected to Conservative principles. And the necessary spending cuts and much else that has to go with this has got to be seen in that context. It's obvious that if you simply say we need to cut spending X and you've done nothing to explain why it's good that government spending is lower, why the free market is better, the benefits of lower taxation, all the things that generate prosperity. If you don't bother explaining that, then obviously people are going to react against the individual changes you propose. So we've got to get that programme out there and explain and be making the positive case. Comes back to what I was saying earlier. Don't justify everything in terms of collectivism. Try and get the socialists to determine the collectivist way. We need to explain why free market, small state is good, better for the country in the long run. And we've not done that for 20 years, so it's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, and I guess the same goes for regulation, right? Can you think of anything we've deregulated in the last 14 years?
I can't. Offhand, I can't.
Any suggestions from the audience? Anything? I mean, where we've regulated a lot more tightly. But it's the same problem there, isn't it? That there's always a specific reason to do X, whatever. Bury FC goes into liquidation, so let's set up a state regulator of football.
Yeah.
We liberalised. Oh right, yes.
Yeah,
We've liberalised. Yes, we've liberalised trendy liberal metropolitan things,
Yes.
probably. Yeah. But we haven't liberalised much else. And do you again think that we need to put a case from first principles about the damage that an over-regulated economy causes? I mean, it's a little surprise to me that there's not much economic growth, because we're spending all our time going around complying with things rather than producing things. You wouldn't expect there to be much economic growth. But again, I'm trying to think of many Conservatives who've articulated that case at all.
Yeah, I agree. And again, it comes down to the fact that so many of us have been captured by the sort of collectivist mindset. Obviously, we've got to get the regulatory compliance burden down, and you probably begin in the most obvious areas like road building and railways and so on, where people can see the cost. We're going to see this week whether our new masters agree the new Lower Thames crossing or not. So obviously needed, but we've waited so long and spent so much money on it that now we're in danger of losing it altogether. So the abstract case for less regulation is a hard one to make without some of these specific things that are not happening. House building obviously is another.
Now you've warned in a good number of your newspaper articles and indeed at the PopCon event in July, which you kindly spoke at, that this is a moment of potential crisis for the Conservative Party, of an existential nature, not just, oh, we've had a bit of a bad result, how do we correct this? You've even said, I think I've used the right word, that if we get this wrong, by which you mean the leadership race, the Conservative Party could disintegrate. Okay, the election result was bad, but very bad. But why do you think that we as the Conservative Party face a potentially existential crisis if we make two more missteps? Or won't the natural pendulum of politics mean that somehow or other things will swing back to us just in virtue of how bloody awful the Labour government is? It's like a football match. I mean, your team can be terrible, but you're bound to win if the other football team's worse, right?
Football has a 90-minute duration, and we don't know how long it's going to take before this pendulum swings back. I mean, the reason I worry is that it seems to me that for the first time for a very, very long time, the party in the country is beginning to break down, and some of the instinctual loyalties are beginning to break down. A lot of members clearly went to reform or just sort of gave up being involved in the party. That's very obvious when you go around the country. The frustration that much of the party has with central office is another symptom of this. And I think some of the psychological loyalty has been broken. So many did vote for reform. So many, in my experience, Conservative voters sympathised with the reform programme and wished it could have been a bit more like ours could have been a bit more like that. So I do think the membership is very small. It's beginning to break up in the country. We've got this big force to our right, and those are the things that, if we create conditions for more of that to happen, the party could easily just disappear. It doesn't have a right to exist. It's got to stand for something, and we've come very close to not really standing for anything.
And in fact, this has happened to quite a lot of mainstream, if you like, historical centre-right parties on the continent.
Absolutely.
The French Gaullists have just disappeared, basically.
Yes.
Maloney is the new force on the right in Italy. The Republican Party, the brand's the same, but you could argue that the party itself in America has changed radically. So with that in mind, what's persuaded you that Robert Jenrick's the man to solve this problem?
So I think a number of things. One is that he gets the depth of this problem and is under no illusion about how fragile the situation is. And I think he said that a few times in public, that it isn't just a question of waiting for the pendulum. The party has got to reconstitute itself. It's got to re-establish its credibility with its potential supporters, which has been lost. So I think he gets that more than the others, at least that's my impression. I think he gets that the party has got to be connected to some sort of principle. And you mentioned that I resigned over lockdowns. Rob resigned because it was just, we simply were not delivering what people wanted over immigration. And it takes it's a big thing to resign. It's turning your back on your friends, if you like. On a point of principle, and that's why it doesn't happen very often. So I respect that courage. I think it was important, and I do think he gets that we need to reconnect ourselves to political, social, economic principle if we are to begin the process of rebuilding.
And you've mentioned, I'm going to be asking this of all of our guests over the course of the next day or two, but you mentioned Reform UK and a good chunk of traditional Conservatives, possibly even Conservative activists going over to Reform UK. Robert Jenrick said he wants to put them out of business. Do you think that's what happens if we put forward a plausibly credible, genuine Conservative narrative? Or do you think there needs to be some sort of rapprochement with Reform UK, some sort of alliance of some sort? Or do they automatically fall away if the Conservative Party gets serious about conservatism again?
I don't think there's anything automatic about it now, because some of these psychological loyalties have been broken. I mean, my starting point is we can't possibly win the next election if the right is divided. That's just a given. It's simply not going to happen. Therefore, the question is, how do we make sure that situation doesn't happen? Now, in an ideal world, I would say, we become a strong Conservative Party again, and we begin to bring voters and supporters back from reform. And as Rob says, there's no need for reform in those circumstances. That may or may not be the case. If we're, a year or 2 years out from the election and we're still very divided on the right, that will be a different sort of situation. We'll have to contemplate different things probably. But I think the best way, as of now, is to reconstitute the party around genuine Conservative policies that appeal to the sort of Conservative voters who left us. That's not sufficient to win the election. Of course, you've got to look to your left to some extent as well as the right.
It is a prerequisite.
But it is necessary. We can't get to first base if we don't do that over the next few years.
Let me come full circle back to my introduction of you and, of course, what I guess brought you to public and political prominence, Brexit. Has Brexit now been done? And if not, what's left to do?
Well, not quite. In Northern Ireland is what I was going to say. It hasn't been completed. And I'm afraid the Northern Ireland problem is more than just about Northern Ireland. We never wanted the Northern Ireland Protocol that Theresa May negotiated for various reasons. We ended up being sort of stuck with it. But what I think was clear was that Boris and I and people who thought like us didn't want it, would want us to do everything we could to override it, get rid of it, undermine it, bring back British sovereignty properly. Now, unfortunately, the effect of the Windsor Framework has been that the Conservative Party's shifted to a position of effectively supporting the protocol, defending these arrangements, saying they're good, and they're not good. They're very bad for the Union, and they're very bad for Brexit, because every time we want to change anything in GB, you've got this question of opening the gap with Northern Ireland. So the protocol, the Windsor Framework, can't last. It's got to be a top priority. Rob Jenrick and I wrote an article together back in May, June time, saying that it cannot last. We must sweep this away. So it's extremely, extremely unfortunate that we got in this position. I do think the ECHR is also part of this now. I thought back in 2019, we could perhaps avoid confronting this question, that the ECHR was not quite second order, but subordinate to the great question of Brexit, and it's now clear it isn't. The effect of Brexit has been to expose just how much power the ECHR and the court in Strasbourg has in practice over so many things. So I think we've got to do that too, once we get our hands back on the levers of power.
Any other international institutions that you're sceptical about? How do you rate the World Health Organization as a necessary part of our armoury?
I mean, most international organisations have, to a greater or lesser extent, been sort of captured by the bureaucracy, by a particular view of international relations that I think is not quite where the world is really. I'd certainly say, I've certainly worried, and I've written about the extent to which the World Health Organization has got invested in the lockdown way of managing pandemics. And I think we should be a bit more robust in pushing back at that. And to give them credit, the previous government by the end was doing that. But unfortunately, we're in others' hands now.
So let me press you a little bit on ECHR. And as some of you in the audience might know, I'm going to be in conversation with Robert Jenrick at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I'm going to ask him the same question. Explain to me why this matters so much. Some of the other leadership candidates are saying, well, yeah, it is a bit of a bind, but a good number of other signatories to the ECHR don't seem to, have the problems that we're purporting to have with it, that they are able to conduct deportations and process things quickly without being gummed up in a massive legal process. So why does it matter? Why do you think the time has now come to say we can't find a way round this, a circuitous route around it, we've got to leave? And is it true that the United Kingdom's signature seems to be somehow more binding than other countries that are signatories to it?
So I would say, first of all, before getting into the legal aspects, it is important politically. One of the problems we've got, possibly the biggest problem we're going to have, is every time we say we're going to do something for a return to power, people will say, well, why should we believe you this time? You had all this opportunity, you didn't do it. So if our policy is to control immigration and to get it down to decently low levels, then we have to show we will the means as well as willing the ends, and we have to tie ourselves to the mast and show that we absolutely are committed to doing everything that's necessary. And if we're not willing to do that now, then the Reform Party problem we're talking about becomes, even greater. We have to lock ourselves in to doing what's necessary, everything that's necessary to get this problem properly solved. So that's the kind of political problem. If we're not willing to say this now, then we're kind of giving up before we've even started. That's the politics of it. The legal aspects. I mean, our common law system is particularly prone at the moment to judicial review, to constant legal challenge, and it's particularly prone to government lawyers kind of interpreting what international legal doctrine is and sort of imposing that on the actions of the bureaucracy and ministers. And every time we've tried to get away from that problem in the various attempts we made over the last few years to say international law is not binding in the way that domestic law is binding, we've always had this sort of shock horror reaction and never be able to get away from it. So the only way is to tackle it
and to repeal the Human Rights Act as well.
We will need some sort of domestic human rights arrangements, and obviously we are committed to some such arrangements in Northern Ireland as part of the Good Friday Agreement. That isn't the same thing as being subject to a foreign court. Yeah,
okay. I've got one more question for you, then I'll come to the audience, so get your questions ready. What do you want to do next? You're in the House of Lords. I can exclusively reveal some information that you might find interesting, David, from our recent PopCon opinion survey, our panel, who we survey. We don't really call it an opinion poll because we don't wait for age, gender, region and the rest of it. But we asked people who they would like to be the next chairman of the Conservative Party. and you were in a very strong second place on 21% of the vote. As I say, as Peter Snow used to say with his statistics on these, it's just a bit of fun.
Exactly.
We don't know.
Exactly.
You're narrowly behind, well, I won't say who you're narrowly behind, but it's the person I'm going to be interviewing next in this row. What role would you want to see for yourself moving forward? Would you be interested in being the party chairman? Or are you more interested in a particular area of policy that you think you can contribute to?
So I would say that I think the person you're interviewing next would be a much better chairman than I would. I think
most people wanted you because of your modesty, David. So that's probably just increased your vote share.
I was a civil servant most of my life. I came into politics late. I haven't sort of lived the party in a way that a lot of people have. And I think to be a successful chairman, you have to have lived the party and sort of know it in a way that I just haven't. So I would say that. I mean, I hope to remain involved in some way. Obviously, I had hoped to be able to stand for the Commons. It didn't work out for various reasons, but maybe there'll be another opportunity. You never know. Otherwise, I think, I would hope to be able to contribute to the policy rebuilding and development in some way. And obviously, there are things you can do in the Lords. We are going to have to fight a bit of a rearguard action on Labour's attempts to water down Brexit and many other things too. So that will be important, and I'll continue to be involved in that as well.
I'm going to go to the floor now, but please join me in thanking David Frost very much indeed. That's been absolutely fascinating. We've got a whole string of microphones. It's probably going to be Ted. Who's on the microphone over on this side? Ted's got one, so I will take them in batches if that's all right. Just makes it easier. So here on the aisle, and then the two at the back. And here are the rules. I really want a question, but you can give a very short speech as long as it is no more than a sentence long and ends in a question mark. Okay, but those are the rules. So. And if you don't mind introducing yourself as well, so we'll take three. Yeah.
Tom Packer, party member, among a few other things. Fantastic talk as ever. Why was it, I mean, I have some ideas, but why was it so inept, was the Johnson government stuck with the Windsor Protocol? And particularly given that, how could a new Conservative, what would be the replacement for a new Conservative government that would deal with the Irish interests and the way the EU are using them to control the negotiation?
Okay, then towards the right on the back row, again, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, Chris McGowan, party member from York. I think some of us were a bit surprised that you and Danny Kruger got behind Robert Jenrick so quickly. My worry about Robert Jenrick is perhaps that he flies a bit with the prevailing wind. So, for example, he did respond quite quickly to Kemi's suggestion about saving money with the maternity leave yesterday.
This is more than a sentence and no sign of a question mark.
I wonder what you can say to reassure us on that, and that he's not another person who's ambitious to be leader of the party, but not quite sure why.
Thank you. Again, if you could introduce yourself, sir.
Yeah, thank you. It's Andrew McHugh, Cherwell District Councillor and member of PopCon. One of the things, I'm going to quote from the July PopCon meeting, which was one of the things to take away from the election, is that it showed that Conservatism was more popular than the Conservative Party. But the other thing is, looking forward, it seems to me at the moment, the way things are going, that it's freedom, personal freedoms that are becoming the sheer point, and that we should be looking at conservative values like freedom and allowing people the freedom to make bad choices that should then inform our policy. Do you think that's right?
Very clever way of giving a speech. You then put, do you agree at the end of the speech. Cunning. So, Tom asked about the protocols. If this was such a problem for the Boris administration, why would a putative Jenrick administration suddenly be able to crack it? Then we were asked about Robert himself. Has he been on a political journey, or is this just, an audit of where the lay of the land is that he's playing into? And then lastly on, is freedom really going to be the rallying cry for the party in the future?
So on the protocol, without going into great detail. I mean, the reason we ended up with something somewhat similar to what Theresa May negotiated, is better, but not that much better, is that Parliament passed a law saying you couldn't leave without a deal. It was in our domestic law and therefore had to be respected. And therefore we were faced with the choice of, in the end, not leaving or leaving on the best terms we could agree with the EU. And that's obviously what we did. We thought we could sort it out later. It's turned out to be more difficult than we thought. But what we don't have is this domestic constraint any longer that prevailed at the time of the negotiations. If we can remove the protocol by negotiations, so much the better, obviously. But if we can't, we need to pass a law that says it no longer has force in the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland. And that is just what's going to have to happen. And I think it needs to be in the manifesto, and our MPs need to be ready for this. You know, we're just unique in having a bit of our country subject to laws made elsewhere. It can't last. So it was... So the specific conditions of the disastrous negotiation that led us to this point, and we can now move on from those if we show enough, if will. Rob Jenrick, I mean, obviously he'll speak for himself, but what I guess I look at it from my own perspective. You know, I've changed my own opinions about quite a few things over the last few years, and I have, to some extent, been radicalised by what I've seen in government as a special advisor and as a minister, and the forces ranged against us. And I think Rob has been through the same process. I don't think he has evolved. I don't think he does think the same things as he thought a few years ago, but that's a good thing. It's responding to reality and dealing with the challenges before us. So, you know, I don't see it as a problem. I see it as getting to grips with the problems the country actually faces and coming up with solutions that might deliver them. Mm-hmm. So I'm less worried by it than others might be. Freedom, it's so important, and I'm kind of embarrassed I didn't say something about this in the first half of the conversation. It should be a conservative value, and if you read Lady Thatcher's speeches, she uses the word all the time. In the 1980s, it was used all the time. Economic freedom, personal freedom. It should be an absolute core value for Conservatives. Freedom of speech now is where a lot of the battle is going to be fought. Economic freedom, you know, the right to do, as you say, do things that aren't necessarily in your best interests, even if your betters tell you you shouldn't. All of those things are part of being a free people and a free country, and we have to get comfortable talking about these things once again. So I agree with you.
Let me take some more questions. I'll come to the front row now. So let me take, I'm being very gender specific here. Let me take these three ladies on the front row. So if you start here and then move the microphone along. And again, if you can introduce yourself and keep it brief, that would be great.
Hello, Wendy Maisie from Cities of London and Westminster. You talked about the issues we had at the general election, motivating our fabulous volunteers and getting our own voters out. And the fact we have to get, obviously, the next leader correct. What we're hearing over quite a lot of the time is the fact that there are certain branches within the party that think that the leader should be taken into the hands of 126 MPs and taken away from the hard-working volunteers and members. Is that surely is going to be as detrimental to the party as getting the wrong leader? Do you agree?
And let's move it, we'll pass it along the row. Thank you so much. If you could introduce yourself.
Hello, my name's Rowena Bass and I'm Councillor Group Leader in Kingston upon Thames. And my question is, so obviously as Conservatives we believe in a free market, that the market's best to regulate things. But I wonder if that's the case with utilities, taking Thames Water into account. So my question is, what would you suggest as a better framework for that? Is it more regulation? Is it nationalisation or something else?
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Lynn Joyce, member from Swansea. How can the Conservatives rebuild when socialism is becoming so ingrained in the devolved nations?
Great array of questions. So Wendy asked about the choice of leader. We do have a pretty obscure process here, don't we, on how to select the leader. This exhaustive round to get it down to 2 candidates and then the membership decide. And it's still the case that you need fewer MPs to back you in order to become leader than you need to retain the leadership, because you could be elected leader with, say, 33% of Tory MPs backing you, and then 51% could kick you out in a vote with no confidence the next day. But what's your view of, have we got the balance right between the MPs and the party, do you think? And Wendy was asking, do you think there's any pressure to cut the membership out altogether and just make it a parliamentary choice? Thames Water, what's the solution there? How do your free market principles stack up there? And then in the devolved areas, socialism now seems ingrained. Disaster or opportunity for the Conservatives?
So on the leadership question, I think, I don't know, it feels like there were people who would have liked it if members had been cut out this time. Obviously that's not happening, and I think it is really important that members remain fully involved in it personally. I do agree, maybe it's a bit odd, particularly with so few MPs, that you could get to a confidence vote with, essentially under 20 losing confidence, and maybe we need to look at some of the details. But I think it seems to me fundamental that members got to be involved in the basic choice, and I certainly don't think members are responsible for some of the things that went wrong over the last few years. That is absolutely clear. So it's crucial to rebuilding the party. On Thames Water and the water utilities generally, I think, it feels like, without being a great expert in it, we've got the regulatory framework wrong, and a lot of the incentives are wrong, so that the incentive has been to sort of extract money rather than invest in it. But I don't think the answer to that is nationalisation. I think that just makes the problem worse. You never have enough capital. Decisions are always taken for short-run political reasons. The correct way forward to me is to bring as much competition as you possibly can into the arrangements for utilities as for everything else, and then be serious about the regulatory framework. And that is complicated, and you've got to keep evolving it. But nationalisation seems to me like an easy answer, and where I think in Scotland the water still is publicly owned and we have exactly the same problems, arguably worse. So
can I just ask, can we just get the price mechanism to work here? If a water company, where competition's quite difficult obviously in water, but if you're fined a serious and proportionate amount for an error, like sewage spills or something, pretty quickly the shareholders are going to be quite insistent that the chief executive makes sure that these spills don't happen and this leakage doesn't occur. It just seems to me we've got the pricing wrong of the fine mechanism, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's probably part of it as well. I agree. I do think that one has to be realistic about how long it takes to build new water infrastructure, and the idea these problems can be solved overnight with a kind of punitive fine policy probably isn't going to happen. But that is part of it. Clearly, all the incentives seem to be wrong at the moment, and that's what we've got to evolve. Devolution. I don't think devolution has been particularly good for this country, and I worry that it's become a kind of fashionable thing to think about rather than a really good policy. What it seems to me that what's happened, particularly in Scotland and Wales, even setting aside the independence thing, is we've essentially created a mechanism in which the Scottish and Welsh governments can blame Westminster for everything and frame all their problems as not getting enough public money from the centre. And it sets up a very confrontational relationship. And I think probably in Scotland certainly too many powers have been devolved, and we need to look at the balance there. And I think if we're going to have devolution, there needs to be more responsibility in raising the money, more capability to create incentives for good economic policy management rather than just to spend more public money. And that's kind of what we've
And this is
created.
true of the mayors as well, right? Your principal
Absolutely,
job
yeah.
as a mayor is to lobby Westminster for more money. That's sort of top of the job description, really, isn't it?
That's right. And the successful mayors have been good at that.
Yep,
You know,
yep.
they haven't necessarily been good in, partly because they don't have the powers, but they haven't necessarily been good in kind of improving the business environment, getting money in. It's been about attracting public money and being rather kind of corporatist in the way they go about their day-to-day business, which
Yep.
can be short-run successful, but isn't long-run successful for
Yep.
the country.
Right, let's take a few more. I mean, I'm being a bit geographical here. Well, I'll take Joanna at the front, and then I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to take four. Then I'll take the three gentlemen who seem to be on the same row there. Is that all right? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, Joanna Reeves. I'm Association Chair for Holborn and St Pancras and recent candidate for the National Convention chairmanship. I'm just wondering if you have any comment on the first few months of the Labour government.
Okay. No swearing. This is a family-friendly audience. And then just on the aisle here, I think there's a gentleman there. Here you go. On the aisle. Look, yep. And then I'll take these two as well. So
Hello, thanks for today. Very interesting. I was in India last year.
Can we have your name, please?
Tony Janio from the Marxist Republic of Brighton and Hove. I was in India last year, and they're genuinely laughing at us destroying our energy infrastructure. They can't believe what we're doing, and as a scientist, I can't believe carbon dioxide, poor little molecule, is going to eviscerate the planet. How do we get that message across to ordinary people who have been hoodwinked by this?
Very interesting. Gentleman here, just pass it along with the glasses.
Damien Chinralal, Kensington and Bayswater. There's a perception that the last series of Conservative governments we've had have been utterly incompetent, leadership, etc. I mean, you blame the blob, the institutional framework. It all happened under 14 years of Conservative government. I can talk many different things. My question is, we may like individual leadership candidates here, like their views, etc., but are they competent? That's really my question to you.
Okay, and then next to you, sir, yeah.
Hello, Des Cooper from South Staffs, just a member and a voter. My question to you is that if the next leader sets out to recover votes from reform, does he automatically, or does she automatically, then hand more votes to the Lib Dems, and vice versa, if he or she sets out to reclaim votes from the Lib Dems, do they automatically set up losing to reform?
So Joanna asked you about your audit of the first 3 months of the Labour government. I don't think this is going to be a very positive audit, but let's see.
No, I mean, we've all seen what we've seen. I don't think they know what to do. Basically, I don't think they have a very clear philosophy. Where they do have a clear philosophy, it's rooted in dated ideas of state control and state direction and public ownership and so on and so forth. But their lack of a clear sort of lodestar and guiding point has led them to this point. I genuinely don't think in most areas they really know what to do. They've got some, in my view, not very competent ministers who are going to come a cropper very quickly. So obviously the readout is negative. I do think though that although it is fun to mock them and they've done a terrible job in these first 3 months and they know it, they will recover. They'll get rid of their most incompetent ministers. There are competent people on the backbenches. They've got a majority of nearly 200. They will stabilise. They will get into a better position. So, we can't expect them to collapse. We can't expect them just to sort of go away. We need to beat them with the power of arguments and ideas next time.
Can I just ask you whether there's anything, could you imagine any areas, Daniel Hannon's written about this, in which there might be one or two areas where we rather applaud what the Labour government's trying to do and tell them to go further? Planning reform, NHS reform. We should warmly welcome that Wes Streeting's going to marketise the NHS, shouldn't we, and encourage him to go further? Or should we just say, the whole thing's rotten, we're going to oppose you hook, line and sinker on everything you roll forward?
if they, I mean, I've said similar sort of thing on housing actually, that if they take forward reforms which appear to be inspired by conservative type ideas of bringing in the market and competition to get things better done, then obviously we should support them. I'm not sure that is what Westminster is going to do, but if he does, obviously we should support. We should be pushing a philosophy, and if it turns out that our opponents have to adopt our philosophy to get things done, then that's good, and we should point it out.
Then Tony asked about carbon net zero. What's your view on this? This colossally expensive. Have we become the laughing stock of the world by being determined that we have a government policy which has worked out the exact number of CO2 particles that must be in the atmosphere at 1 minute past midnight on the 1st of January 2050? Quite a feat of central planning, that.
We've taken, this big idea and become obsessed with it without getting into the science. The effect of what we're doing is we've got the highest industrial energy prices in the developed world. I think the highest domestic prices now as well. Industry is leaving the country. Why will anybody come here to make things in these circumstances? We've got obsessed with a kind of false trail, in my view, of renewables, of wind and solar that are never going to be able to do the job, are always going to be extremely expensive compared to gas and nuclear. And we need to sort of shake this off. We need to get back to a belief in energy abundance, power stations producing energy that the country can use and we can all use to do things. And I'm afraid renewables are an extremely expensive false trail in this, in my view. And at some point, we're going to have to shake that off.
And then there were a couple of questions on the leadership and competence needed. Do you think that's been a fault of recent leaders? And should we not just be looking at this leadership election when the members get a say from what's your ideological position? Do we need to think who might be the leader of the Conservative Party that could actually successfully execute this if we were to return to power?
Yeah, I mean, of course, one of the things we've discovered about the last few years is that you don't really know who can do the job until they actually do it, and you've got to infer from other things before that point. There's a big job to be done in reforming the party, modernising, changing, reorganising the party, and I think that will be a test, obviously, about whether we're dealing with a capable and competent person or not, and that is the only thing that's actually in our hands. So we must show that we can do that. I mean, I would say that personal competence is part of it, but the ability to get your things done through a massive bureaucracy is also part of it, and that requires having a clear set of principles that you can explain to people, motivate people, so people understand what you're trying to do when you're not there day to day and can act in accordance with it. That's something we've just lacked, and that's why it seemed to be so difficult to deliver things. We haven't really known what we wanted to deliver ourselves, so we've got to bringing back that principle is crucial, I think, in the competence issue. And then the final question, I think, was about this question of do we look left or right?
Yes.
Is there a trade-off? Yes. I don't think there is. There can't be a trade-off. We've got to get back. In 2019 we got 14 million votes, and in July we got about 7 million. That's the loss. Most of those were to the right or to not voting.
Yeah.
A couple of million went to Labour or the Lib Dems. And it seems to me the correct approach to take is to say we bring back people to the right by being authentically conservative, and we bring in people to our left by having the best ideas, looking like we've got a good plan, showing that we know how to improve the country. The Conservative Party's never been popular as a brand, as long as I've been interested in politics, in the sort of Waitrose belt of southern England. It's always been unfashionable But people have come to us because we seem to have the right ideas and the ability to make things happen. And that's how we get people in. You can't be both left and right. We've got to be authentically conservative and bring people into our left by showing that that is going to improve the country.
Okay, if we're quick, we can probably take a couple more questions. Let me take these three in the middle. I'm trying to be very geographically equidistant as well. So the lady here, and then the gentleman behind, and then the gentleman behind. If we can get a microphone right. Sorry, I know it's hard for our people with the mics to get right to the middle.
Hi, Lindsay Sharrow from the Recon. So you spoke earlier about industrial policy. I would like to know how we square the free market with what happens with hyperglobalisation. Obviously, hyperglobalisation costs us a lot of jobs in the Midlands. I am a big fan of Thatcher. I'm certainly pro-market. But how do we give people back the opportunities that used to come in those sort of careers, which just don't exist anymore?
If you could pass it over your shoulder.
Hi, Michael Bracken from Cheshire and Amersham. How big a problem is the wokery in Whitehall, and how do we get rid of it?
Thank you. My name is Andre Camler. I'm a Federation Chairman and a County Councillor from Mansfield in Nottinghamshire, the Red Wall country. I disagree with a lot of what you say, actually, and I'm a right-wing Conservative. When I was out knocking on the doors, there was very little talk about true conservatism, and there was a lot of talk about stabbing elected leaders in the back by the establishment Tory party. And that's Boris and Liz. I think they were really destroyed by the establishment. What guarantee can we have if we elect a populist right-wing leader this time that the same liberal left, dare I say, safe seat Conservatives vote against them and get rid of them again? What are your thoughts on that?
There you go. Good. Three questions to wrap us up. Industrial strategy. I mean, I come over in shivers when everybody mentions industrial strategy. You know, I'm all in favour of strategy and I'm all in favour of industry, but I'm not in favour of government putting the two together. The wokery problem. How big is it? What should be done? And are we just going to go through, is it going to be deja vu all over again, that there'll be a coup against a sensible leader of the Conservative Party if we elect one this time?
Industrial strategy. The best industrial strategy, in my view, is to get the business environment right. It's to have low taxes, low spending, low regulation, all the things that contribute to people wanting to invest in this country and make money and profit from it. And I don't know what the industries of the future are going to be. Nobody in this room knows. No politicians know. And when they try and know, all they do is substitute their judgment for the market. And, you know, sometimes the market gets things wrong, but it can correct and move on. When politicians think they know, they don't correct, they double down. And that's why industrial policy is a bad policy. Level playing field, good business conditions, low taxes, low spending, that is the best way to keep the country prosperous, in my view. We've just got to keep explaining that. Excuse me. Wokery in the civil service. I mean, we have presided over the creation of a sort of state ideology in the public sector, which you've got to pay due obeisance to. Definitely, that is a problem. It's a free speech problem. It's a kind of intellectual problem as much as a sort of policy problem. I don't know that wokery in the civil service is an actual block to doing what we want to do, as long as we take some tough decisions at the start, like repealing or significantly changing the Equalities Act. Wokery is a sort of distraction, probably, in the public service, rather than an actual obstacle to getting things done. If we're clear what we want to do, then we can do it, I think. Which is not to say I like any of sort of woke ideas. I think they're an absolute intellectual black hole sort of wrong turning. But it's the climate you've got to operate in for part of the time. What we've got to do is pass laws that mean we can
Repeal the Equality Act.
Repeal the Equality Act. I've said that many times. We didn't do it. Or reform it because we weren't confident we had a majority in Parliament to do it, even after 2019, which tells you something about the composition of the Conservative Parliamentary Party, unfortunately. And the last question was, we might select a brilliant leader, but, is it just they'll be tossed out again by the very parliamentary party that you've just described? Well, what can one say? I hope not. Obviously I can't say that it couldn't happen because the mix of the parliamentary party is not that different to how it was before the election. It's just the numbers are much smaller. I hope that now, everyone can see we're looking down the barrel of a gun now as a party, that, a degree of self-discipline and focus is really, really important. But the new leader has it in their own hands. They need to show they are a leader, they have the right ideas, and that they can bring people in behind them, and then we won't face this problem. I do agree with you. My experience, I'm from Derby, Nottingham area myself, and a lot of my family have said this sort of thing to me. Why did you get rid of Boris? We voted for Boris. This is what it was about. So I absolutely agree that was a big part of the problem. But I do also think there was a lot of currents under the surface that the mess with the leadership sort of obscured, but would have been much, much more visible in the campaign if we'd not had that.
David, we've overrun our time. It's been a fascinating conversation, and we'll no doubt return to all of these issues, whoever our next leader is. There's an awful lot to put right, but thank you for giving us your wisdom and thoughts on exactly how to put things right. Ladies and gentlemen, Lord David Frost. David, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.